Hi, I'm Dr. Mitch Harlan, and welcome to the Truth Talks podcast. Today's episode, I have a young lady by the name of Victoria. And I'm going to really control the tone of my voice today because this is a really heavy story. It's about a loss of a child and a miscarriage and loss of other people at such a very young age. Victoria's come on the show to share her story so that someone who may be experiencing something similar or certain amount of loss in her life can shed some light on how she was able to repair and to heal in her own journey. Victoria, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thanks for coming on the show. These aren't always easy shows, but as everything they say, life goes on, and it must. It must. So tell us a little bit about your story.
So my story starts in 2018. I lost my high school boyfriend. We had been together for 4.5 years in a plane crash. It was very tragic. It was 2 weeks before his 21st birthday. And 8 months later, I lost my grandma to breast cancer. And then in October of 2020, I had a stillborn daughter. And in March of 2021, I had a miscarriage.
And your stillborn daughter was 38 weeks.
38 weeks.
So
yeah.
we want to make this into perspective. You looked full term.
Yeah.
Everything was designed to be the way it was. I did hear this story before. There's a couple things in the story that really frustrated me beyond belief when I heard some things, primarily what the doctor had told you, that lit me up like beyond belief. I actually have a significant amount of experience with these types of stories. It's not uncommon. People think this is uncommon. It's not. And what I think is uncommon is people who do have to go through it, they don't have a good place to go to be able to talk about what just happened. And it's not one or two, it's millions. And this is the part that I thought was kind of tragic, because when I heard what the doctor had said to you, I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, what in the world are you thinking? Now, we're going to get to that topic in just a little bit. But what I really want to share with people, and you feel free to correct me at any moment of any part of this story. I don't understand the difference between a stillborn in 38 weeks and a miscarriage. Maybe it's a man in me. Maybe it's the doctor in me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem like those two are comparable.
I don't think that they are comparable in that you're at such a different stage of pregnancy. Stillbirth is 20 weeks or further along, and then a miscarriage is earlier than 20 weeks. And physically, there's just so many differences, I would say. But in the end, you still are losing a child and your hopes and dreams that you had that went along with that child. I think that part is the same.
Not to create drama, but we want to tell a story as it was. I saw pictures of you, and it's a party. You're pregnant. Mm-hmm. We can see it. Everybody's expecting something. Did anything up until that point look different, feel different, sound different?
Not that I can remember. Hindsight is 2020. So now looking back, I'm like, oh, maybe that was something, or maybe that was something. But in real time, I thought everything was perfect. I thought she was perfectly healthy. I had no inclination that something was wrong at all.
Because you were at the doctor the day before.
I was at the doctor that morning.
Day,
yeah,
that morning.
It was like 3 hours earlier.
Heartbeat's good.
Heartbeat was good.
Everything's
strong.
Perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
On the way home, that's when you noticed you thought Braxton Hicks.
Yeah, I had been having Braxton Hicks, and they had been somewhat powerful, but on the way home from that doctor's appointment, they had ramped up like insanely. So I was like, okay, this might be the real thing. But I was a first-time mom, so I didn't know what to expect. I was like, oh no, I still have 2 more weeks. Like in my head, I thought, oh no, that's when I'm due, so that's when the baby's gonna come. I didn't even think that was possible at that point, I guess, even though it very much so is.
Well, even me as a doctor, and I was a doctor when my first baby was born, and my wife's having Braxton. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Where are we going? What are we doing here? And so I think one of the big misconceptions is, what did I do wrong, right? And then, not comparatively speaking, but I was fairly old. We were older parents, if you will. You're 20 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big difference. Like you wouldn't even really know what to expect other than the stories that you've heard.
Mm-hmm.
So unless there was something really truly wrong, you probably would never have known.
Yeah.
So I want to get to that day. You're driving home, you get home.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what happens next.
So I got home and I was in excruciating pain. I was having back labor. And so my mom came over and she was timing the contractions just so we could see how far along they were and how far apart they were. And the only thing that brought me any comfort was being in the bath. So I was like sitting in a warm bath, just trying to breathe. And she was timing them. And we were waiting for my ex to get home from work so that we could leave for the hospital, because at that point, I think they were only like 4 minutes apart or something like that. So they were coming pretty quickly. And I knew I was already dilated because at the doctor's that morning, she had told me I was dilated already.
So now we're going to get to the dumbest statement I've ever heard, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you do get to the hospital. What's that doctor tell you?
She comes in because they were having trouble finding the baby's heartbeat, and she had just found it that morning. So when she got the ultrasound machine out and put it on my stomach, I think she realized pretty quickly that the baby was gone. And the first words out of her mouth were, "Oh, Victoria, didn't you feel her stop moving?" And I was just in complete shock. And I also immediately was like, oh my gosh, I did something wrong. Like, I should have been paying attention to her movements. I was paying attention more to the pain because I had never experienced anything like that before. So I was like, I just felt selfish. I was like, I was paying attention to my pain. I wasn't even like thinking about if she was moving or not. I couldn't even tell if she was moving or not because of the labor. But those being the first words, that's something that stuck with me for a long time. Now it still makes me angry when I really think about it, but now I've made peace with it. But at the time, that was just the worst possible thing to hear in that
I'm glad
moment.
you made peace with it, because I didn't and I haven't. And that's something that, again, anytime we do one of these shows, we do it for anyone. So, if there's OBGYNs listening, don't say something stupid, right? I mean, that's probably the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life, but it happens, and that's kind of the way it is. This is kind of the area that, again, I need to know you're comfortable. Are you comfortable with everything?
Oh, yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
I'm
So
comfortable.
here's the question that I ask. You go through the delivery, you see the baby. What happens next?
I felt the strongest love that I've ever felt in my entire life. Like, that was my daughter. I was holding her. She was beautiful. But I have never felt my heart shatter like so quickly in years. Like, it was such an intense pain. I was just in shock also. So it was like this I was just feeling so many things all at once. I had just given birth. The baby was gone, but she was in my arms, but she wasn't really there. It was just, I was feeling so many things all at once.
How does your brain, I mean, I know this is hindsight, but I think this is what's always interesting when you're having a discussion. It's always about what you think you would do, right? When in reality, there's no plan, right? I'm a big believer, and that's how I write off anything that I know is out of my control. I'm like, you know what? There was another plan, and I just wasn't included in that plan. How did you handle that?
I don't know if I did completely handle it for a while. In that moment, I just felt like I was being punished, and I wasn't sure why. I felt like I did something wrong. I thought my partner at the time did something wrong. And in a way, I felt like he definitely did. But I couldn't even turn to God. I was so angry. And I was raised Christian. And so, of course, my mind went there. Like, God must have a plan. But I was like, what could this plan possibly be? And whatever it is, I don't like it. Like, I don't want to be a part of it anymore, because this can't be it for me. So it was, again, just a mixture of things.
Were you, and I know this may be a crazy question, but when you were holding her, did you hope that she would come alive?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Even like waiting for like time to start pushing and everything like that. I was like, oh, maybe they made a mistake. Like maybe when she comes out, she's going to cry and I'll hear that and everything's going to be fine. And even when I was holding her, I kept thinking like, it's okay. Like you can open your eyes. It's going to
Right.
be okay. Like I just kept thinking maybe, and even all through the night too, even when I wasn't holding her and she was in like the bassinet that they had next to my bed, I kept thinking maybe in the middle of the night I'm going to wake up because she's going to cry or yeah. Oh yeah, like my brain was telling me all those things.
Yeah, God bless you. I mean, they always say you'll never get more than you can handle, and I've always said that's one thing I can't handle. Obviously, you're a bigger badass than I am because I don't know how I would deal with that, and I always think, man, I just never want to see one of my kids sick. I want to go before my kids. My grandmother lost, 4 of her 5 children before she passed, and she was a minister. And she always says, I don't know what the plan is. She goes, but the hardest thing that I've ever had to deal with is burying one of my children. And so when this came up, it's not fun to talk about, but also all of those things you didn't know. I'm hoping there's a whole bunch of people right now that are dealing with it that get some sort of like peace and they can find a way of moving on because you absolutely have to move on in these situations. But that wasn't it. Then it gets compounded again.
Yeah, so just let's see, a few months later in March of 2021, I had found out in February that I was pregnant again, and it was a huge surprise. But I was like, wow, okay, maybe this is meant to be. Like I was able to get pregnant again, and this time it was like really unexpected. So maybe this one is meant to be it. But in the back of my head, I was like, God, but what if I went full term just to have the same thing happen again? And I knew that I could not handle that. And in March, I ended up miscarrying, which, like I have said, that was also very traumatic. But at the end of the day, one thing that brings me peace is that I didn't have to go through a whole 9 months of pregnancy for it to end with more loss. So while that was, especially after everything I had already been through, that was the last thing I needed or wanted. But at least I didn't have to go through an entire pregnancy again.
I actually think that's probably one of the most reassuring because miscarriage is very common.
Mm-hmm.
It's not uncommon at all. And I have seen young ladies that have a miscarriage and it pretty much destroys their life. There's always a story worse than yours, right? There's always that one worse than yours. And I think by sometimes hearing this, it gives people a little bit of peace of hey, you know what? It didn't get that bad, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So I really, really, really appreciate you coming on and doing that type of honesty type of thing because, again, sharing your story, it's ending suffering for somebody. And I think it's actually healing when you kind of get through something that big, especially at a very young age. So I really commend you. But that's what happens when you got to grow up real fast, right? It's like, damn, didn't realize I was going to have to grow up that fast, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the things along that way that you started telling yourself or you heard from other people that started to make it a little bit better?
I just kept telling myself that the universe has more in store for me and that this wasn't it. Like I would have healthy children one day and it wasn't going to start and end with 2 losses. Like that would not be it for me. And I just kept like reaffirming that. And I felt very supported by my friends and family. I don't think I would have made it through that point in my life without them at all. I honestly contribute pretty much all of my healing to them because they were always there for me just to listen. They didn't even have to say a whole lot to make me feel better. It was just them being there to listen to me that meant everything. Because people will say, oh, everything happens for a reason, or God needed another angel. And okay, like that sounds really nice on paper, but that was the last thing I needed to hear. Like, no, everything, okay, maybe does happen for a reason. There are like some little things, but I hated hearing that because I just wanted to.
What did you want to hear?
Like, I'm so sorry. That's awful. And no one should have to go through that. Like I felt like that I didn't need somebody to try and give me a pep talk. I needed someone to just be empathetic of how I was feeling. And I know it's hard to have empathy when you've never been through that. It's hard to even imagine or wrap your head around it, but I didn't want a pep talk or someone to like, I think there is definitely such thing as like negative positivity where it's like no matter what goes wrong, you're like, oh, it'll be okay. Because you know what? Sometimes it's not okay, and it's okay for it to not be okay. And it was okay for me to not feel okay. And the people around me really understood that. And they were like, yeah, this sucks. And I'm sorry. Like, there's not much else I can say because this is just awful. And we know it's awful and you know it's awful. So
Well, I'm not going to be very empathetic here. I'm going to put
okay.
you on the spot.
Okay.
Someone your same age has it. What do you say to them?
Exactly that. I've had friends.
But you've been through it.
Yeah.
So you know.
Yeah. And I guess before I went through this, I hadn't had much experience. Like I hadn't really known anybody that had struggled. I had seen I had learned a lot about fertility. I felt like through my mom and stuff like that. I had known, but she always got pregnant very easily. But I had never had that close experience with loss of a child or of a pregnancy until I went through it. So I can't speak on what I would have said before going through all of this. But after this, I've had people reach out, even some people that I don't know super well, but they know that I went through it. And they'll reach out to me like, hey, I just had a miscarriage and I'm really struggling. And I tell them, like, I'm so sorry. That's awful. Like, no matter how far along you were, that was your child and you're going to grieve them however you see fit. And then there are a few groups that I have joined and that I'm a part of, and pages on social media of other women that have gone through it. So I would always send links to those groups because I felt comfort in knowing that I wasn't alone in it either. So as much as my family and friends were supportive, talking to other people that had gone through similar experiences was also amazing. And then you felt like you weren't alone.
So versus people just loving on you, it was also comforting to find other people who had went through the same experience.
Yeah, like I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but this life, it's going to happen. And 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. So knowing that I wasn't alone and it wasn't something I solely did wrong. Like sometimes it just happens and it's awful, but it does just happen.
No, 100% it just happens.
Yeah.
It's very rarely that someone did wrong because, I mean, obviously we have babies born with cocaine, crack, heroin.
That was one of the most frustrating things for me to hear about was babies that were at the hospital withdrawing from drugs and their parent obviously didn't care enough or was struggling with addiction and put their child through that. And I had had a completely healthy pregnancy and mine ended the way it did.
Did they ever give you a diagnosis?
No, we never did an autopsy. At the time, it just felt too invasive. Now, looking back, I do somewhat wish that we had done that just so we maybe could have had answers. But sometimes they do an autopsy and there still isn't answers.
Were you bleeding a lot?
No.
So no brevia or anything like that
No.
they would have known?
No, my placenta had some calcification on it, with like more than they would normally see at 38 weeks, but also not enough to be super concerning. And when I went in, I remember them saying that my white blood cell count was a little high, like maybe I was fighting something off. But again, it wasn't high enough that they thought that could have contributed necessarily. I mean, maybe if it was like a mixture of things, that could have done it. But yeah, they really didn't have answers.
Is there any point in your life where you recognized or perhaps are recognizing now that this was completely out of your control, like it was nothing that you did? Did it take a while to come to grips with that, or do you even believe it now?
I go back and forth with that. I was under a lot of stress in my personal life while I was pregnant, and I blame a lot of I think in my head just to justify like that this couldn't have happened for no reason. I think I blame it a lot on the stress. But again, like women go through much worse and have a lot of stress on them when they're pregnant and everything turns out okay. So now I have just kind of accepted like that was awful and it happened and it wasn't necessarily anything I did and there was nothing I could have done to prevent it.
which I think is the healthiest pathway.
Yeah.
Did you do any therapy or anything like that?
I did, yeah. I went to therapy starting like right after what would have been my daughter's first birthday. So it took me about a year to finally go to therapy. And I did that for quite a while.
Because you didn't want to, or you just
Um,
weren't ready, or both?
I think both. I couldn't see how talking to a stranger was going to help me more than talking to my friends and family. But what I started to realize was my friends and family were all affected by my daughter's loss too. Like my parents were so excited to be grandparents, and my friends were excited to have a niece. Like there were so many things, so many connections. So they were grieving too. And it was helpful for me to talk to them, but they were sad and they were grieving. So talking to a third party that had no relation to me or my family or my daughter offered a new perspective and a new light.
Did it feel like there's a different level though? Like you having gone through it, you know, everybody else is grieving, but did you always feel like, wait a minute, your grieving's not as bad as mine?
Yeah, I think it's just different. It's so hard to compare grief because it's so relative, but it's just different. Like my parents were grieving a granddaughter, I was grieving my child, and everyone acknowledged like you are the mother and you're going to have the hardest time here for sure. Nobody ever made me feel like their grief might have been worse than mine, but I also knew too that it's all perspective, and people struggle differently too. Like some of it's more outward and some of it people keep in.
So we're gonna go down this highway too, because I think it might shed a little bit of insight as well. But your occupation is a hairstylist,
Yes.
and I'm assuming probably heavier leaning towards women's hair versus men's hair. I'm guessing women are mothers.
Yes.
We hold on to that today, regardless of what the world says. We're all about women are mothers.
Absolutely.
We know how that is different, and now you've got to tell this story to every one of your clients.
Yes.
I can see on one aspect, though, that might be a good thing. Or was it?
At first it felt like a good thing. I had developed a good relationship with almost all of my clients at that point, and they had seen me through my entire pregnancy. So I think at first it felt good to talk about it, even though I did definitely cry a few times. Like the first few times I had to talk about it, I did get emotional. When it started to be a little bit more detrimental was when like months had gone by and some of my clients hadn't been in for a long time, and now they came back and they're like, how's the baby? And they're so excited. And I had to like kind of go back to where I was when I first came back to work. And I went back to work like 3 weeks after I had her. So a lot of my clients that I saw regularly, they kind of knew something was wrong because I was going to be gone for a lot longer than that. And then I ended up just going back. So some people like knew that something bad had happened, and they were like, if you want to talk about it, I'm here. But if you don't want to talk about it today, like that is fine. I just want you to know I care about you. Like a lot of people would say things like that. The ones that I was closer with, they would cry with me. So some of it felt very therapeutic to talk. But like I said, when it had been a while since I had seen them and they didn't know about anything that had happened, that's when it was like, oh my gosh, like I just had like 3 weeks where I didn't have to like retell the story, and now I'm back to having to talk about it again.
You know, again, courage is portrayed in many ways, right? Like we think a lot of that as, you know, people in the military getting shot at and going into the line of fire. This is very courageous, right? When you got to go and you got to kind of face all of these different things that you know are coming, but you still got to go in and face it. I mean, you could have crawled in a hole and never came out, and that's not going to serve anybody. It's not going to serve your life. It doesn't serve anything. But that's a tough go when you got to tell that story over and over and over again. But we're at a new place.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Got a new boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Is he cute?
He is cute.
I'm going to look up on your social media. 'Cause
Okay.
We're going to find out. We're going to find out if he's cute or not. That's still part of your story.
Absolutely. It always
So
will be.
when somebody comes into your life, this is part of the story. How is telling that story now?
Now I it I feel like it's gotten easier to talk about it, and I have a different perspective on it now. I'm almost 3 years out. She would have been 3 in October of 2023. So I have a new perspective on it. I have a new outlook on life, even. So now talking about it doesn't feel. It's still a heavy topic, but it doesn't feel as heavy on me or on my shoulders.
Does it help you if you do get to consult with someone else that's going through it? Does it make you feel better
Yeah, it does.
knowing that somebody else is dealing with this and you've been down the road a little bit further? I can
Mhm.
only imagine that because I think that is that's the beauty of story. That's why we have truth talks, right? Because we want people to be able to hear something that makes it just a little bit better, maybe a little bearable. But it is impressive that you were able to go back and get back on with life, and you got to do it at some point. Is it early, late? Well, I think that depends on who you are, but I would assume that earlier is better. If one of my sayings, and goes back to my Missouri thing, and everybody hates it. My wife absolutely despises it, but I go, if you got to eat a shit sandwich, you don't nibble on it. Just eat the whole thing,
Yeah.
right? As fast as you possibly can. It seems like that healing process gets you on a road, and I almost feel like, man, as a hairdresser and all those people, I almost feel like that was maybe one of the best things that could have happened.
I I actually kind of think so too. I really do. I talk to people all day, and I it's not like practicing your speech, but in a way
Right?
it is a little bit. And yeah, just getting it out, and even like I won't always bring it up to new clients, like when people ask me, "Oh, so do you have kids?" It depends on the day. A lot of times it's easier just to be like, "Oh, no." But sometimes I do feel compelled to talk about it, and I'll be like, "Well, actually," and I'll tell them. And one time I even had someone say, "Oh, that's happened to me." And like she probably never would have brought it up if I didn't.
Correct.
So, but now we formed this bond that's even deeper than just a hairstylist client bond. It's a lost mother to lost mother bond, So
Well, let's be real. Hairstylists aren't really into hair. They're
it's
therapists that
yes,
happen
oh
to do
yeah.
your hair at the same time, right?
Mhm.
As what my mother-in-law always says, and it is so true. Here's just something I am a little curious about, though. When you go back and you're telling this story, you've got young clients, I'm sure, and you've got old clients, I'm sure. Was there a difference in the way they reacted to you?
I would say yes. The older generation, I think, is more tight-lipped on things like this. They just don't. I don't know, like the baby boomer generation, I guess. Always, I feel
You can
like
say old people. We're
puts
fine with it here.
puts on like a very strong front, and they keep their emotions to themselves. So I feel like that was a lot of the time that I was met with, "Oh, well, God has a plan," or "Everything happens for a reason," and then we move on from it, like, very quickly, whereas with, like, the younger generation, even my parents' age, they were more wanting to talk about it and wanted to hear, like, how I was feeling, and, "Oh my gosh, like, how's your family? How are you?" Like, got into it more and they weren't afraid to get deep with it, whereas I feel like the older generation definitely is more like,
And I know it's individualized, right, to each
mhm.
person.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
which did you prefer at the time?
I preferred ha having to talk, like,
Get it out.
them asking questions and wanting to know how I was doing, that was more comforting to me.
And so, again, what a courageous story. I mean, what it's just again, man, I wish we had all the answers, right?
Mm,
If we did, but then it wouldn't be life. We
yep.
wouldn't have a journey of life if we knew all the answers. The question I have for you though, because in older generations, we just tie it on the bootstrap and we move on to the next thing. Do you have any fear of getting pregnant again?
Absolutely, I think I definitely want to have kids again, but I know I will be a nervous wreck. I think it's inevitable. Everyone that I've talked to that's been pregnant after loss, it's a different pregnancy. Like, your innocence surrounding pregnancy is completely gone. It's shattered. Like, that anything can go wrong at any time because you've seen it happen to yourself. So I I think I'll be a little more cautious. I'll probably call my doctor a lot more. Like, I'll be anxious.
But you're hopeful.
I'm super hopeful. Yeah.
Where where do you stand now? Where is there a belief system? Are you still mad about it? Where are you at?
I'm very spiritual. My relationship with God is iffy. It has been for years, though. I believe in God. I just feel more connected and more of a energy with nature. So I like to say that. My friends affectionately refer to me as the witch. That's taken it a little far, I think. But I like crystals and I like,
You're a 24-year-old
yeah,
hippie.
yeah, a little bit,
Yeah.
yeah. But I still believe in God and I know that there's more. I'm not as angry, definitely not as angry as I used to be. I have more peace just with everything in general, and I know that there's more coming my way and better things coming my way too.
No, I believe that. You have a great heart. I can definitely see it in you. I thank you for coming and sharing this story. And it there's again, it is people do think this is uncommon. It is actually very common. Like as you said, you did is a great statistics 1 in 4,
Mhm.
and I have women who've had multiple, and it's tough. But I do see a little bit of a characteristic where when it happens early on, right?
Mhm.
It seems like it's much easier to get through for the majority. I mean, there's always that
Mhm.
person is deeply connected, and I believe we are deeply connected from conception. That's why there's
Absolutely.
such a bond there.
Mhm.
To go what you went through, I have had a couple other stories that I know. One being a personal friend of mine, and perspectives are similar. And so I think what a lot
Mhm.
of stuff you've said today is really going to resonate with somebody that's dealing with or going through or will ever go through that. So I really applaud you for coming on and sharing that story. I again, we don't care what anybody else believes. My belief is that there's just good things going to happen. Like it was just part of the path that you're on. And I believe there's something good in store for you because you have the heart to want a baby, to love that baby, and all that stuff. Something good is going to happen. It just does. But I think you've probably end some wicked suffering for somebody that is out there right now that didn't know where to turn, what to do, or how to do it. So thank you again for coming on the show, telling your story. It was amazing.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.